I was a struggling waiter working a late shift. An old man came in, counting pennies to pay for his meal. I couldn't bear his quiet humiliation, so I gave him the food for free. He just nodded and said, "You'll see me again." I had no idea what he meant until his lawyer walked into my restaurant a week later with an envelope that would change my entire life. Before we get into it, I'd love to know, what was your very first job? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more stories every day. Okay, let's head to that diner. There's a particular kind of loneliness that only exists at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night in a struggling highway-side diner. It's a silence punctuated by the hum of the fluorescent lights, the drip of the coffee machine, and the sound of the rain lashing against the large plate glass windows. My life, for the better part of a year, had been a series of these lonely hours, each one a small, necessary sacrifice to keep my head above the rising water of my mother's medical bills. My manager, Mr. Henderson, was a man who seemed to find a grim pleasure in the quiet misery of his employees. He was a petty tyrant of a tiny fluorescent kingdom, a man who would watch the security cameras from his small, cluttered office, looking for any infraction, any reason to dock a server's pay. His cardinal rule, the one he repeated to us every single day, was no freebies, ever. This is a business, not a charity. It was in this quiet, oppressive atmosphere that the last customer of the night walked in. The bell above the door chimed, a small, sad sound in the empty room. He was an old man, probably in his 80s, dressed in an old but impeccably clean dark suit. He moved with a slow, heavy sadness, as if the very act of walking was a monumental effort. He didn't look like our usual customers. He looked lost. He sat in a small booth in the corner, and I walked over with a glass of water and a menu. "Evening, sir," I said with my practiced customer service smile. He looked up at me, and his eyes were the saddest I had ever seen. They were a pale, watery blue, and they were full of a grief so profound, so absolute, that it felt like I was looking into an open wound. "Good evening, son," he said, his voice a dry, raspy whisper. He ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a bowl of tomato soup and a black coffee. As I served him, I tried to make small talk, a habit of mine to pass the long, lonely hours. I asked him if he was from around here. He looked out the rain-streaked window at the dark, empty highway. "I used to be," he whispered, "a lifetime ago. My wife, Clara, and I, we had our first date in this very diner, in this very booth." He gave a small, heartbreaking smile. "She passed away last week. I wanted to sit here one last time, where it all began." My heart ached for him. We spoke for a little while longer. I just listened as he told me about his Clara, about their long, happy life together. It was a beautiful, quiet, and deeply sad conversation. When it was time for the bill, I brought it to his table. It was only a few dollars. He reached into his coat pocket, and then his face, which was already so full of sorrow, seemed to crumple further. He pulled out a small, worn coin purse and emptied its contents onto the table, a small, sad pile of pennies, nickels, and dimes. He began to count them, his old, trembling fingers fumbling with the small coins. I watched as the color rose in his cheeks, a flush of pure, profound humiliation. He was short. He was about $1.50 short. My manager, Henderson, was watching the whole scene from the kitchen doorway, a smug, contemptuous smirk on his face. He was enjoying this.
He was waiting for me to embarrass the old man, to demand the rest of the payment. But I couldn't do it. I looked at this proud, heartbroken old man, at his quiet, desperate humiliation on what was clearly one of the worst nights of his life, and I thought of my own grandfather. I reached over and discreetly pushed the small pile of coins back towards him. I leaned in, my voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Sir," I said, "you know what? I completely forgot. A new promotion just started tonight. All meals for veterans are complimentary on Tuesdays." I had no idea if he was a veteran, but it was the kindest, most dignified lie I could think of. "Your meal is on the house." He looked up at me, his watery blue eyes full of a new, dawning, and deeply moving gratitude. "You are a very kind young man," he whispered. "Just doing my job, sir," I lied. I took the bill back to the register and paid the full amount myself, out of the small, crumpled pile of my own tips. As the old man was leaving, he stopped at the door and turned back to me. His expression was different now. The sad, broken look was gone, replaced by one of a strange, clear, and powerful resolve. He looked me straight in the eye. "You are a good man, son," he said, his voice no longer a whisper. "You'll see me again." And then he was gone, a lonely figure disappearing into the rainy night. I watched him go, a strange, warm feeling in my chest. That feeling was immediately extinguished by the cold, furious look on my manager's face as he stormed out of the kitchen. "Riley," he barked, his voice echoing in the now empty diner. "My office, now." I knew, with a sinking, absolute certainty, that I was about to be fired for my small, $10 act of compassion. His office was a small, cluttered, and windowless room in the back of the diner, a place that always smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and disappointment. He was sitting in his worn-out office chair, leaning back with a look of smug, predatory satisfaction on his face. He gestured with his chin towards the small, grainy, black-and-white security monitor on his desk. On the screen was a frozen image of me, at the front counter, sliding my own crumpled tip money into the register. "Don't even try to lie to me, Riley," he began, his voice a low, greasy purr of a man who enjoys his own small power. "I saw the whole thing. Complimentary for veterans? A new promotion? This is a business, not your personal soup kitchen. You gave away company product. In my book, that is the exact same thing as reaching into that till and stealing cash." "The man was grieving, Mr. Henderson," I said, my own voice quiet but steady. "He was on his way to his wife's funeral. He was $1.50 short. It was the decent thing to do." "Decent?" he sneered, leaning forward now, the full force of his petty tyranny on display. "Let me tell you what's decent, son. A balanced register at the end of the night. A food cost percentage that is under 30%. A customer base that actually pays for the food they eat." He stabbed a thick finger at the screen. "That decent little act of yours just cost me $11.52 in product. What part of that simple business school math do you not understand?" I just stood there in the quiet, humming silence of his small, sad office. I did not argue. I did not apologize. There was a part of me, a part that had been beaten down by months of his quiet, daily cruelties, that just wanted to quit, to walk out, and never look back. But I thought of my mother's medical bills. I thought of the rent that was due next week. And I knew I couldn't. I needed this job. So I did what I always did. I took it. He didn't fire me. That would have been too merciful. Instead, he wanted to humiliate me. "You're a bleeding heart, Riley," he said with a sigh of theatrical exasperation. "And I can't have a bleeding heart on my payroll. So here's what's going to happen. I'm docking your next paycheck for double the cost of the meal, $23.04, to account for my wasted time having this conversation. And I'm cutting your shifts. For the next 2 weeks, you're on cleanup duty only. No tables, which means," he added, a cruel, triumphant smile on his face, "no tips. And this," He scribbled furiously on a formal disciplinary form, is your final written warning. One more act of charity, one more decent thing, and you are out on the street. Are we clear? Yes, sir, I said, my voice a hollow, empty thing. I signed the form and walked out of his office, my dignity in tatters, but my conscience, at least, was still intact. The week that followed was a slow, grinding, and deeply humiliating form of punishment. I spent my nights not as a waiter, but as a busboy and a dishwasher, scrubbing greasy pans in the back of the kitchen, my hands raw, while the other servers took the tables and the tips. I was broke, I was exhausted, and I was beginning to think that my one small act of kindness had been a terrible, foolish mistake. The old man's promise, "You'll see me again," now felt like a cruel joke. It was exactly 1 week later, on another cold, rainy Tuesday night, that the bell above the diner door chimed. I was in the main dining room, wiping down the sticky, ketchup-smeared tables when I looked up. A man had just walked in. He was not one of our usual customers. He was in his late 50s, tall, and he was wearing an incredibly expensive, perfectly tailored dark gray suit that probably cost more than my entire month's rent. He looked completely and totally out of place in the humble, slightly grimy diner. He carried a heavy, expensive-looking leather briefcase, and he moved with a quiet, confident authority, his sharp, intelligent eyes scanning the room. My manager, Henderson, who had been at the front counter, immediately straightened up, a fake, greasy smile plastered on his face, sensing a wealthy and important customer. "Good evening, sir," he had gushed. "Table for one?" The man in the suit completely ignored him. His eyes swept past the other staff, past the few remaining customers, and then they landed, with a strange and deeply unnerving intensity, directly on me. He began to walk towards me, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the cheap checker linoleum floor. My heart began to pound. My first terrified thought was that he was some kind of a corporate inspector, a hatchet man from the head office, and that Henderson had called him, that I was about to be fired in the most formal and humiliating way possible. He stopped in front of me. "Are you Ryan Riley?" he asked me, his voice a low, serious, and deeply resonant baritone. "Yes, sir," I managed to say, my own voice a hollow, empty thing. He then placed his heavy leather briefcase on the sticky diner table I had just been wiping down. "Good," he said, his expression unreadable. "My name is Julian Davis. I am an attorney." He looked at me, and then he added the words that would change my life forever. "I am the executor of the estate of the late Mr. Samuel Gable." And he left some very specific and very unusual instructions for you and as well. I stood there in the middle of the diner, a dirty rag in my hand, the words of the man in the expensive suit echoing in the suddenly silent room. The executor of the estate of the late Mr. Samuel Gable. The name hit me with a jolt. Mr. Gable, the kind, saddled man from the rainy Tuesday night. And then the other part of his sentence registered. The late Mr. Samuel Gable. He had passed away. A wave of genuine, surprising sadness washed over me. I had only met him once, but our brief, quiet connection had felt real, and I had found myself hoping in the days that followed that he had found some peace. My manager, Mr. Henderson, who had been about to tell the lawyer to leave, now froze, a look of greedy, vulture-like curiosity on his face. An estate, a lawyer. That meant money. "Ryan Riley is here," Henderson said, his voice now a slick, oily thing as he gestured towards me. "How can we help you, counselor?" The lawyer, Mr. Davies, gave my manager a look of such cold, dismissive disdain that Henderson actually took a step back. "My business," the lawyer said, his voice flat, is with Mr. Riley. Alone. He then turned his sharp, intelligent eyes to me. Is there somewhere we can speak privately? I was still in a state of shock, but I managed to nod towards the back of the diner. There's a booth in the corner, I said. We sat in the worn, red vinyl booth, the air thick with the smell of old coffee and the unspoken questions that hung between us. Mr. Henderson hovered at a nearby table, shamelessly pretending to wipe it down, his ears practically twitching with the effort of trying to overhear. Mr. Davies placed his heavy leather briefcase on the table and opened it with a series of soft, expensive clicks. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. Mr. Gable passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 days after you met him, the lawyer began, his voice now a little softer, a little more human. He was a very private man, a very lonely man, especially after his wife Clara died. And he was, as I am sure you have gathered, a man of considerable means. He pushed the envelope across the table to me. He left this for you. He was very specific in his instructions that you were to read it first. My hands trembled slightly as I took the envelope. I broke the seal and pulled out a single folded sheet of heavy, elegant stationery. It was a letter, written in a surprisingly strong and steady old-fashioned script. I began to read. Dear Mr. Riley, it began. If you are reading this, then my time is over, and I have gone to join my Clara. I am writing this because in my final days you showed me a kindness that I believed had vanished from the world, and it is a kindness that must be acknowledged. You may have gathered that I am a man of some wealth. What you do not know is that this diner, the very place you are sitting now, was the beginning of that fortune. 60 years ago, when I was a young man with nothing but a dream, I took my beloved Clara on our first date, right here, in this very booth. It was here that I proposed to her. It was here that we sketched out the business plan for our first company on the back of a napkin. This place was not just the diner to me. It was the cornerstone of my entire life.
I returned there last week for one final visit, to say one last goodbye to her memory. I was a man drowning in my own grief and cynicism. I had come to believe that the world was a cold, selfish, and greedy place. And then I met you. You saw a man in need, a man humiliated, and you chose to sacrifice your own meager earnings for the sake of a stranger's dignity. You did not just give me a meal, son. You gave me back a small piece of my faith in humanity. I had to pause, my own eyes now blurring with tears. Henderson was still hovering, a look of impatient, greedy curiosity on his face. I continued to read. I have no children, no heirs to carry on my name. My fortune, I had decided, would be left to a series of faceless charities. But your quiet, profound act of decency changed my mind. A legacy is not about money. It is about the character you inspire in others. And you, young man, have a character of unquestionable quality. I looked up from the letter, my heart a confused, emotional wreck. What was he trying to say? The lawyer, Mr. Davies, seemed to read my mind. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second, much thicker and more official-looking document. The letter, he said, was the why. This, he said, placing the document on the table, is the what. He opened the document. It was a last will and testament. He pointed to a final, freshly added codicil. Mr. Gable, the lawyer said, his voice now a formal, legal declaration, was the secret, sole owner of this diner and of the entire building and the land it sits on, a property he purchased decades ago for sentimental reasons. In the final, legally binding addendum to his will, executed the morning after he met you, he leaves the entirety of the business, the property, and all its assets, free and clear of all debts and liens, to you, Mr. Ryan Riley. The room went silent. The only sound was a sharp, strangled gasp from the next table. My manager, Mr. Henderson, who had finally heard the magic words he had been waiting for, had dropped a stack of menus he was pretending to clean.
He was staring at us, his face a mask of pure, abject, and horrified disbelief. I stared at the deed in my hand, at the legal language that was rewriting my entire life. Then I looked at my former manager, who was now, by the strange, beautiful, and impossible logic of the universe, technically my employee. Mr. Gable's final words to me had been, "You'll see me again." I finally and completely understood. He hadn't just come back, he had just given me the power to build a future he would have been proud of. And my first act, I knew with a sudden, absolute clarity, was going to be to take out the trash. The lawyer, Mr. Davies, stood up from the booth, a polite but distant smile on his face. "My office will be in contact with you tomorrow morning, Mr. Riley," he said, as if he had just discussed the weather and not the complete and total upheaval of my entire existence. "We will begin the formal process of transferring the operational accounts and the payroll. I trust you will find everything in order." He gave me a small, respectful nod, and then he was gone, the bell above the diner door chiming his departure, leaving me alone in the quiet, humming silence with my new fortune and my old boss. I didn't move. I just sat there, in the worn, red vinyl booth, and I read Mr. Gable's letter again. And then a third time. My mind was a roaring, chaotic sea of disbelief, but one clear, powerful current was beginning to form beneath the waves. A profound sense of duty. This wasn't a lottery ticket. This wasn't a random act of fortune. This was a mission, a legacy entrusted to me by a good man in his final hours.
Across the room, my manager, my now former manager, Mr. Henderson, who had been frozen in a state of horrified shock, finally began to move. He walked slowly, cautiously, towards my booth, his usual, arrogant swagger completely gone, replaced by the shuffling, uncertain gait of a defeated man. He was wiping his sweaty palms on his cheap polyester trousers. "Riley?" he began, his voice a pathetic wheezing thing that was a world away from his usual barking growl. He quickly corrected himself. "Ryan. Mr. Riley. Sir." The word "sir" came out of him like a small, painful stone. Is this for real? I mean, this has to be some kind of a joke, right? A prank?" I slowly, deliberately folded the beautiful, heartfelt letter from Mr. Gable and placed it carefully back in its cream-colored envelope. I then gathered the thick legal documents, the deed to this building, the business license bearing my own name. I slid them neatly into the folder the lawyer had left for me. And then, finally, I stood up from the booth. I was no longer a tired, overworked waiter. I was the owner. And it was time for my first official act of business. I walked from the booth to the center of the diner floor, forcing Henderson to scuttle backwards to give me space. The other waitresses and the old cook, who had been watching the entire unbelievable scene from the kitchen doorway, now slowly began to emerge, their faces a mixture of hope and a deep, profound, and fearful curiosity. "It's not a joke, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice quiet, but it seemed to carry a new, strange weight, a new authority that filled the entire silent room. "It is, as you have so often and so loudly reminded me, a business transaction, and you, of all people, should appreciate the importance of a legally binding contract." I looked around the small, humble diner. I looked at the worn-out linoleum floor I had mopped 1,000 times. I looked at the sticky, ketchup-smeared tables I had wiped down just an hour ago. And then I looked at the tired, hopeful faces of my now former coworkers. "You're right about one thing, Henderson," I began, my voice now as cold and as steady as a block of ice. "This is a business, but you and I have a very, very different idea of what a good business is. You believe a business is a balance sheet, a food cost percentage, a register that is balanced down to the very last penny." I took a step closer to him. "But I have just been taught a different lesson. I have been taught that a business is people. It is the customers you serve, and it is the staff you lead." I let the words hang in the air. "Last week, you taught me a lesson. You taught me that in your business, there is no room for decency. You punished me for showing kindness to a grieving old man. You humiliated me for sacrificing $10 of my own hard-earned money for the sake of another human being's dignity. You told me this place was not a charity. I looked him straight in the eye. Well, tonight it is my turn to teach you a lesson. I paused, letting the full, crushing weight of my new power settle upon him. In my business, I said, the word my a sharp, definitive crack in the silent room. There is no room for petty tyrants. There is no room for men who find joy in the humiliation of their own staff. There is no room for a manager who is so blinded by the bottom line that he cannot see the value of a simple, human kindness.
His face, which had been pale with fear, was now turning a blotchy, ugly shade of red. He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. "So, Mr. Henderson," I concluded, my voice now a quiet, final, and utterly inescapable command, "your services are no longer required. You have until the end of the hour to clear out your office and to be off my property. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you." He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, the full, catastrophic reality of his own downfall finally crashing down upon him. The quiet, pathetic waiter he had been tormenting for the past year was now the man who held his entire miserable future in his hands. And that future was now over. I watched as he turned, a broken, defeated man, and shuffled back to his small, sad office for the very last time. I then turned to face the stunned, hopeful, and slightly terrified faces of my new employees. My life as a struggling waiter was over. My new life as a restaurant owner and as the quiet, unlikely keeper of a good man's final, beautiful legacy was only just beginning. I watched my former manager, Mr. Henderson, scurry out of the diner, a single pathetic cardboard box of his personal effects clutched in his hands. He didn't say another word. He didn't even look at me. The bell above the door chimed his departure, and with that small, final sound, a decade of his petty, soul-crushing tyranny was over. I was left standing in the middle of the quiet, empty diner with my two former coworkers who were now, impossibly, my employees. They just stared at me, their faces a mixture of pure, unadulterated shock and a dawning, brilliant hope. The old cook, a man named Sal who had worked in that hot kitchen for 30 years, was the first to speak. He wiped his greasy hands on his apron, walked over to me, and enveloped me in a huge, surprising, and deeply comforting bear hug. "Thank you, kid," he rumbled, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard from him before. "Thank you." That night was the beginning of our revolution. The three of us didn't just close up the diner, we started to dream. We sat in that same red vinyl booth where my life had changed, and with the legal documents spread out before us like a treasure map, we planned a new future. We talked not about profit margins, but about quality. We talked not about efficiency, but about community. We talked about turning a tired, failing diner into the kind of place Mr. Gable would have been proud of. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of hard, joyful work. My life of lonely, grinding shifts was replaced by a life of shared, creative purpose. We closed the diner for 1 month for a full renovation. I used a small, responsible portion of the estate's funds, which Mr. Davies had helped me access, to bring the place back to life. We tore out the cracked linoleum floors and restored the beautiful, original hardwood underneath. We reupholstered the torn vinyl booths in a warm, rich leather. We didn't just clean the kitchen, we gutted it, installing the state-of-the-art equipment Sal had only ever dreamed of. And we changed the menu. We kept the classic tomato soup, of course, but we renamed it Clara's Comfort Soup, in honor of Mr. Gable's late wife. The rest of the menu we filled with simple, beautiful, and delicious food made with fresh, locally sourced ingredients. And the most important change we made was a quiet one. I hung a small, simple framed plaque by the cash register. It read, "The Gable Rule. No one in our community should ever go hungry. If you are in need and cannot pay, please speak to the manager. Your meal is on us. All we ask is that one day you pay the kindness forward." When the Gable Diner reopened, it was a sensation. The story of the kind-hearted waiter who had inherited a restaurant and fired his cruel boss had become a local legend. People came from all over the county, not just for the food, which was incredible, but to be a part of the story. to support a business that was built on a foundation of simple human decency. My vindication was not the moment I fired Henderson. It was in the daily, quiet victories that followed. It was in seeing the new, genuine smiles on the faces of my staff, who were now paid a fair living wage. It was in the look of profound, tearful gratitude on the face of a single mother who had lost her job and was able to feed her children a hot meal because of the Gable rule. It was in the quiet, profound satisfaction of building something good, something real, something that mattered. It's been a year now. The diner is thriving, more successful than Henderson in his wildest, greediest dreams could have ever imagined. My mother's medical bills are paid. My sister's enrolled in the local community college, her future bright and full of a hope I had once thought was lost forever. I no longer work the late shift. I am a business owner, a community leader, and the proud and slightly terrified steward of a good man's legacy. Some nights, after we've closed, I sit in that same corner booth, the one where it all began, and I think about him. The lonely, grieving old man who walked into my life on a rainy Tuesday night. His final cryptic promise to me had been, "You'll see me again." And I realize now that he had kept that promise. I see him every day. I see him in the face of every customer we serve, in the quiet dignity of the work we do, and in the simple, powerful, and enduring belief that a single act of kindness can, in fact, change the entire world. An absolutely beautiful and heartwarming story about how a single act of kindness can have a ripple effect that changes a life forever. What a powerful testament to Ryan's character and Mr. Gaby's vision. Let us know what you think of this incredible story in the comments below. If you were inspired by this story of integrity being rewarded, please show your support by hitting that like button. And be sure to subscribe for more uplifting stories of karma and justice. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.